All right, I've got Jake Crain of Crain and Company on today. Let's talk a little Auburn football. We did a whole bunch of Alabama stuff, and the Alabama fans are pretty rabid right now. But I want to get a really, really bold prediction from you on Auburn this year. But I will give you a couple of minutes to marinate on that, and won't ask it right off the jump. That said, thank you for joining me. How you doing, man?
Man, TJ, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. You know how much I respect your work and what you got going on, and yeah, happy to be a part of it, and happy as we roll closer to actually toe meeting leather.
Yeah, I feel like so as a Florida State guy, the whole conference realignment, which we'll talk about in another video, baseball going to the Final Four, just it feels like this has been a quicker offseason. I don't know what the perspective is on that outside of my mental space, but EA, the video game coming back, it does feel like this offseason has been quicker. I don't know, maybe I'm crazy.
No, I don't think you are. It's funny, I coached college football for 10 years, 6 at the Division I level, and we used to always say it's amazing how fast, the season goes when it gets here. But when you're actually in it, whether that be playing, whether that be coaching or whatever, the offseason tends to go fast. But just from a media perspective now, looking at it, we talk about the video game coming out, media days is finally here. But with all the new things, you mentioned conference realignment, the new playoff format, there's so many things to talk about. I feel like that space isn't as vast as it used to be, which is a good thing. I hope, it comes like a faster than a speeding bullet.
Yeah. I think 10 years ago, and even you might need to even back up a little more than that, it'd be hard to do a college football show like all year, all the
For
time.
sure.
Maybe a little bit before that. I guess that's kind of when Feinbaum started. But like 15 years ago, what would you talk about? Like during it wasn't like it is now.
No. And that's not even talking about the transfer portal, which
Yeah.
just adds another life to it. So
Recruiting and
no,
everything else,
it's there's a lot more material, and there's always some story or some news. I mean, you didn't have Arch Manning opting back into a video game 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Hell, 10 years ago is the last time we had the video game. Now that I think about it.
Yeah, he was, his dad was created in
Yeah,
some of
yeah.
these old ones. So, all right, what's the mood right now for Auburn? If you had one word to describe the mood around Auburn football, coming off of last season, heading into this year, what is it?
I would say the mood is aligned. I know some people say, "Oh, that's not really a mood," but if you understand what I'm talking about from an Auburn perspective, it breeds cautious optimism. Which, look, if you're an Auburn fan, you're dead inside anyway, so it's hard to feel anything. But in reality, when Auburn does get aligned, and by aligned I mean administration, athletic department, fans, players, donors. When Auburn gets aligned, good things can happen. And it's been somewhat of a fractured relationship before Hugh Freeze got here with Brian Harsin. You remember Stop the Steal, all that stuff. And then the way that, Brian Harsin was more of a house cat who wanted his milk brought to him and didn't want to go out and recruit and do the things necessary to be able to operate Auburn at the highest efficiency level, which, look, it's tough when your two biggest rivals are Alabama and Georgia. I mean, you look at what those two teams have done. It's like being surrounded by transformers and those things from Pacific Rim. I mean, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. But I think there is a feeling of alignment which breeds cautious optimism. You look at the schedule. There is no easy schedule at high-level college football, or especially in the SEC. We say lighter and heavy. Yeah, you got to go to Alabama and to Georgia and also to Missouri. But outside of that, you get your first 5 at home. Oklahoma being that 5th one. A lot of questions about Peyton Thorne. What jump's he going to make? But when you look at Auburn's roster, TJ, I mean, it's kind of like, what's that with that show where they used to be like, move that bus. And then you see the way the house looks after it. The house looks a lot better than it did when Hugh Freeze took over. I don't think people realize how thin Auburn's roster was overall, not just at the wide receiver position or the skill position, but up front and from a depth standpoint. It kind of feels like at least Auburn's not going to be fighting with a hand tied behind their back this year.
Yeah, and you mentioned the schedule. So over under set at 7.5, which I think is fair. I could easily see 7 or 8 if they kind of take care of business. Again, they're going to be pretty tough games at times too, but should get off to a good start. Like I think it would surprise people if Auburn didn't start 4-0. Alabama, A&M, Cal, New Mexico, Arkansas. You should win those. Oklahoma being a tough one. I don't think that's an impossible game, but then obviously like two really tough ones at UGA, at Missouri. And then I think about UK kind of the same way. On the road against UK, I don't think that's necessarily easy, but very winnable. They could win. Honestly, they could win the next four in a row against UK, Vandy, Monroe, UL Monroe, A&M, and then bam, at the end's tough. But I'd really only say that's probably two auto losses. Maybe at Missouri is a pretty tough one. We'll see kind of what Missouri looks like, halfway through the year. But manageable. Do you think the over-under set well at 7.5?
Yeah, I do. I actually, if this team's going to be what I believe they're going to be, I think the floor is probably 7-5. I really do believe that. Ceiling most likely is 9-3. It's going to be tough to get 10. If you're going to get 10, you're going to have to split those 4 road games of Alabama, Georgia, Missouri, and Kentucky. And I don't think Auburn right now, while they have improved the roster, that's a tall task. Even, winning one of at Alabama, at Missouri, or at Georgia would be hard enough, let alone going to play a Kentucky team that I think Brock Vandegrift's going to be interesting to watch this year. But you brought up the beginning of the schedule. Auburn has to start 4-0. And probably, honestly, 5-0. Because they start 4-0, if you set up circumstantially how it would work, the first 4 games they should be favored in, and they should win. With Cal at home, you get Arkansas at home. Obviously, you play a couple cupcakes there in between. But then that 5th game, that's Oklahoma's first SEC road game.
Yeah.
That's Oklahoma's first SEC road game with a brand new quarterback who I think is going to be really good down the road in Jackson Arnold, and a brand new offensive line. I only know 4 things, and they all start with F, but I do know that having a new quarterback and a new offensive line is basically a death sentence going into a conference like the SEC.
Yeah.
Not that you can't figure it out, but it's when are you going to figure it out? And if Auburn is 4-0 going into that Oklahoma game, most likely they're going to be close to ranked, if not ranked.
That should be a ranked matchup, yeah.
In between the top 20 and top 25. And we'll see with Oklahoma, who plays Tennessee early, but that place is going to be a madhouse. Now, if you start out 5-0, you get that bye week. There's a ton of momentum. Auburn's back to relevance again. And the last piece, if you look at the way, and not to be too long-winded, TJ, but for the fans out there that aren't familiar with where Auburn is right now from a whole scope situation, it's easier to paint the picture this way. The last part of the puzzle that Auburn is missing is the on-the-field production. You got a brand new state-of-the-art facility. The facilities at Auburn are top-notch. You've recruited really, really well. You flipped a guy Georgia wanted last year really bad, flipped a guy Alabama wanted last year, finished with a really good recruiting class. You've beefed up the roster through the transfer portal, maybe not at quarterback the way you wanted to, but pretty much everywhere else. The last ingredient in the recipe is on-field success. That 5-0 start with everybody all hyped up and Auburn's back going into a bye week would give you something to point at to the recruits coming up and saying, look, I told you guys it was a matter of time before this happened. Now we've put it together. So if you go get your ass beat at Georgia, look, man, it is what it is. You're going to play probably number 1 Georgia on the road. Now you're 5-1. You got to get it back together and hopefully in the year strong. But it gives Auburn fans some much-needed positive momentum that they've been thirsting for a while, especially after last year with the way the Alabama game ended, man, just rips your guts out.
Yeah, a couple of rough weeks to end the year, and how do you obviously a lot of new players, not a lot of turnover, but for the fan base, they need the 5-0 start. I mean, and certainly 4-0, right? Like if you lose a close one to Oklahoma, I don't know if he's burning the place down. Although SEC,
no, it would be much more forgivable.
Yeah, but you can't lose any of the first 4.
No,
that'd be pretty brutal. You mentioned him. What's the ceiling for Peyton Thorne?
How tall is a midget? No, I'm just kidding. Well, listen, I will say, familiarity and stability are 2 things that are disappearing more in college football. And having your second year at a place, even with a new quote-unquote offensive coordinator, we know that Hugh's going to be the guy that handles the quarterbacks and the play calling. The terminology should be very similar. So that's a hump that you get over. And while Peyton Thorne struggled to make the routine throws routine last year, he didn't have a lot around him. Football is the ultimate team sport, right? You can't go out there and do it by yourself. Cam Newton's the closest thing I've ever seen to actually going out and doing it, literally by yourself. But, he's from planet Krypton. When you look at what's around Peyton Thorne now, with an offensive line that should give him more confidence in pass protection, with Cam Coleman, with Robert Lewis, with Keandre Lambert-Smith, with Rivaldo Fairweather coming back, he has many more options to bail him out of trouble outside of just, holding on to a Bible and praying when he's back in the pocket with what he had last year, if we're going to be honest. Now, having said that, he's the thing that probably surprised me the most with Peyton Thorne, outside of he really can run the ball pretty well. And at Michigan State, he ran a much more pro-style offense than what he did at Auburn last year, where you have a lot of RPOs built in. I didn't think his decision-making was very good overall, which that would have been the last thing I would have worried about with Peyton Thorne, who is a coach's son, who's played a lot of high-pressure, high-efficiency type snaps. His decision-making should be better in this offense. You pair that with better weapons and better protection, I think he breaks the 2,000-yard passing mark this year, and I think he's really effective in the run game. But you got to have guys that can bail you out of trouble. I think he has that this year.
Outside of maybe him, which I don't know if he would have been your answer anyway, but just to change pace a little bit, what is your biggest area for concern?
Well, I think pass rush depth. Still, even though, Auburn added some pieces to it, there should be a lot better on the defensive line. If McLeod doesn't stay healthy, Falk's got to grow up pretty quick. He's going to media day, so obviously he's taking on a leadership role there. And Eugene Asante's a Swiss Army knife, and they've added some pieces around him. But I know that football is a battle of attrition, right? That's what it is. It's not about your first 22. It's about your first 66, really. That's what it comes down to. So will Auburn have enough pass rush depth for later in the year when guys are nicked up, when guys are beat up, when guys can't go, to be able to be effective and get guys like Jalen Milroe to the ground, be able to disrupt Carson Beck, be able to disrupt Brady Cook and things like that. So probably there, a lot of people would say secondary, because Auburn has, lost a couple guys. You lost a decent amount last year to the NFL. I'm not as worried about that because I do know that a great pass rush can hide an average secondary. A great secondary can't hide an average pass rush.
Yeah. All right. I want to get your hottest take, your boldest prediction for Auburn this year, but where can people find you? Where can they follow you? Where can they hear your show?
Yeah, look, I mean, if you love college football and sports in general, you can go to YouTube, you can go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify. It's Crain and Company, Crain and Company. We go live each weekday, 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Central. We have live calls, a live chat. I would say it's like a cooler version of the Feinbaum Show. But if you can't catch us live, it stays on demand.
Quite a bit younger.
Better looking.
Yo, more hair, better looking,
Yeah.
all those things. All right, what's your hot take? What's your boldest prediction for Auburn this year?
I would say probably my boldest prediction is that I think Auburn will be in the playoff discussion throughout the whole year. Like even and what I mean by that is on the fringe of maybe getting in. Yeah. I think there's a chance that Auburn could be 9-2 heading into that Alabama game. And if Auburn is 9-2 heading into that Alabama game, we're going to start hearing discussions about bubble teams in the 12-team playoff, just like we hear about it in the NCAA tournament. Now, it's going to be tough to beat Bama. 9-3 Auburn is not getting in most likely. But I would not be shocked to see Auburn on the fringe or in the periphery of playoff discussion all the way through the last game of the regular season.
So I'll add to it. Last year was the chalkiest year that I've ever had in college football. Like it felt like you just never lost betting on the favorites, which I know you guys feel like.
It was chalk city, that's for sure.
It was great. It was great for my wallet. This year, I am scared to death because I think it's going to be the complete opposite of that. Like I just don't think we could get 2 years in a row where we all take Vegas for a ride. And so to me, that lends itself to more of those 9-3 discussions, like, man, what if they win this? What if they get hot late? So I don't know, I'll throw a little gasoline on your fire.
I mean, I don't think it's even that crazy to think about. I mean, saying it, it's again, when you look at the way the schedule stacks up, If they're able to beat Missouri and Kentucky on the road, which look, if ifs and buts were candy and nuts, we'd all have a Merry Christmas. You're not beating Georgia on the road. I just don't see that happening. So you would have to beat Missouri and Kentucky, or really, excuse me, you would have to beat one of Missouri or Kentucky to make that 9-2 mark going into that last game of the regular season in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah. I chatted with Jake about the future at Auburn, how changes at Alabama may impact things. You can check that video out by clicking on the screen right now.